Yeah, Andy, just wanted to ask you an open-ended question. I guess when you evaluate the class you just signed, is there like a specific position group that you're particularly excited about adding to the roster?
I don't think there's one in particular. I think it's more so we got a little bit of everything. The receiver group is really, I think, going to be exciting. Obviously, at D line we added a lot of size, which is exciting, and then some athleticism with Thomas Davis. Um, it's James Williams coming into the mix in the secondary. He's obviously a really, I think, going to be a great player. And Cameron Kinchen's back in the back end, just a really smart, physical player. So I think there's, to answer your question, David, probably a little bit of everything. And there's a lot of variety in this class. It's pretty balanced. So that's what's exciting. We kind of filled a lot of needs in this class.
Wanted to ask you too, just about the counter situation. And this is an issue with a lot of schools around the country, especially with the one-time free transfer probably coming in the future, right? I'm just curious, like, what your opinion is on the counter situation. Is that something that you think should be changed? And if so, do you have any ideas or proposals about what that might look like?
Sure. I think it's something that the NCAA has to address. If they pass this one-time transfer, which it looks like it's inevitable that they're going to do, they have to give us some relief from that. When I say relief, I mean ways to adjust the roster and to get back to the numbers. Because you've seen, I think it's over 200 kids have jumped in the portal in the last 2 weeks, maybe. There's a lot of kids jumping in and not a lot of places to go because the initial 25 numbers are really hamstringing a lot of schools. So I think it's something they have to address. To be quite frank, the NCAA has a history of changing a rule, seeing what happens, and then forming a committee or a subcommittee to figure out a solution. When I think there's some easy solutions that we've proposed to our compliance office, and was working with the ACC on some things. So just for example, if a guy were to medical, you'd kind of get a 1-for-1. If a guy transfers and is eligible and takes advantage of that rule, as long as he's eligible academically to return, that'd be a one we could get back. If a guy goes to the NFL early, that'd be one we could get back. So some common sense solutions that make a lot of sense for a lot of people, and that would help rosters get back to where they need to be. Because what's going to happen is we can get some freebies this year, but this 22 class and the 23 class is when you're really going to have to get creative if we don't have a solution. And I think it's a great thing with a one-time transfer, but they're also going to wind up, and I think in the end, hurting a lot of kids because there's going to be no place to go because of the rules that they have put in place. So I think it's something they need to take care of at the same time, but will it happen? I'm not sure.
Andy, we're going to go to Matt Shodell at CaneSport. Matt, go ahead for Andy.
Oh, hey, Andy. So just to be clear, I mean, you're talking about the 25, but really the 85 is the problem, right? Because you can count transfers forward, but against a future 25, but the 85 would be the issue, right? That's also what you're alluding to?
It's a little bit of both, Matt. The big thing for us, so if we have guys that transfer and we have guys that leave to go to the NFL, we can't go find guys to add to our roster from another place or sign more guys because we're limited by the initials that we have every year. Right. So, for example, if we were to go out, we have a couple of initials left in this class. But if we lose some more guys or some guys transfer, get hurt, whatever it may be, and we need to replace those guys, we're limited by those initials on what we can bring in the next year. So, yeah, it's a little bit of both, but really the big thing is the 25 initials.
Okay, that makes sense. I just wanted to clarify one other thing. So I know, Manny Diaz said a while back that you guys have 24 max. I know these numbers fluctuate. You can get a scholarship back if a guy transfers out and something happens. Is 24 still the max? Is that still your understanding? And then also, are there any particular positions you guys are focusing on adding with whatever number you guys do have left?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that's the number we're working off of right now. But we've got some positions in mind. Obviously, we like to get look into the corner market. We kind of missed a little bit on. We got a good one in Malik Curtis. But we're always looking to get some more depth at that position. But like Coach says all the time, we're going to look for guys who make our roster better. So if there's a better player out there in the transfer market, or if there's a guy that went unsigned in this early period, we're just going to look to make our roster the best it can be. So, yeah, there are some positions like corner that we'd like to get a little more depth at, but we're just always looking to make the roster better.
Andy, we're going to go to David Furones at the Sun Sentinel. David, go ahead.
And yeah, I want to know just what recruiting was like during this pandemic, the dead period that came from it. How soon did the staff identify this is what this cycle is going to be like through the long haul, through the closing, pretty much, where it's Zoom calls and you can't meet face to face and no visits and all of that. And just what was the approach as soon as you guys identified this is what it's going to be?
Yeah, I think early on in the spring when we went into the dead period, it looked like it wasn't going to get any better. So it's kind of, common sense kind of tells you it could drag on and we need to be prepared for it. So I think there was a rush of how are we going to recruit via Zoom? And then it was how are we going to do film sessions, virtual visits, all those kind of things. How are we going to recreate that experience as much as possible over time? So I think we did a great job of that. And again, I think it goes to credit to the staff, coaching staff, and then also our support staff, Drew Rossetti and Tim Brogdon and Cam, even some of those guys that were giving us information, giving us content, just to be able to recreate some of that experience and getting that information. But the thing about this class, though, I believe is that a lot of them were on campus last year and in the last 2 years, probably with camps, unofficial visits as juniors. So, there's so many of these guys that are from South Florida, had that experience already being on campus. So I think it was just more so how can we develop and further the relationship we have with them? The real question is going to be this 22 class and the 23 class that a lot of them haven't had that experience of being on campus. We haven't been able to, evaluate them in person, whether it's a camp or a spring practice. That's where it's going to get really interesting. And how creative can we be? How long is this going to drag on? And there's rumors that it may, obviously go through April, but it may drag on through the summer, depending on what the situation is with the numbers, out in public. But that's where it's really going to get interesting is that 22 and 23 class that we need to have on campus, really, and physically evaluate where we're going to go with that. That's going to be the big question mark.
Andy, we're going to go to Manny Navarro at The Athletic. Manny, go ahead.
Hey, Andy, congrats on a great class you guys put together yesterday. Curious as to, kind of piggybacking off that last question from David, what do you do in the event that it stays closed? I mean, that you guys aren't able to get these guys on campus, because obviously it's so important. You guys were able to prove that relationships matter because you got the 21 kids without them coming on campus. But how do you sort of evaluate? And Coach Diaz said it's obviously tricky.
Yeah, we're obviously trying to pour through as much film as we can from this season for the guys that actually played football. I think there'll be a lot of these camps, whether it's Nike, Under Armour, Rivals. I think that'll still happen in certain places around the country. We're going to have to pour into some of those camps and see what kind of, information we can get from measurements, from film that we can pull. That's going to be interesting. How much value did you put in that stuff versus real football evaluations in the spring? So that's the big part, is being able, the identification aspect of it is how we can get the best evaluation possible to identify those guys. And then from that point, we're just going to have to try to do what we can to get them on the phone, to get on the Zoom, get their parents and the decision makers involved. So we have somewhat of a baseline for these guys and to begin to develop that relationship. But it's going to be really tricky, what happens with that and how really far you can get in that relationship when it's all virtual. So.
And then if I could, as a follow-up, obviously we didn't get a chance to talk to Coach Diaz about Jake Garcia and adding him to the class, but I'm curious about the process of hunting for a quarterback. You guys were doing it all season. Can you kind of take us into, maybe you can't mention all the names, but certainly how long did the list sort of expand to in terms of how many different quarterbacks you guys are looking at? And then just what your thoughts are on Jake.
First of all, Jake is a really exciting player. I think he's a great addition to this class. The guy just has a presence about him. When he walks in a room, people kind of to perk up, and I think people gravitate to him. If you look at what he's been able to accomplish Football was canceled in California. He moves to Georgia, to one of the biggest high schools in the state of Georgia, plays there and takes over that team for a while. In whatever circumstances came up, he had to move to another high school. And then he's in the midst of a playoff run right now that's pretty impressive. And I think that just goes to a credit, obviously, one, to his abilities as a quarterback and a player, but just the kind of person he is, how he can take charge of a room. Guys gravitate to him, will play for him. He's just an exciting player to have, and is a great addition to the classes. As far as quarterbacks go, we had a short list. Coach Lashley is very particular about, what he looks for in guys, and he had a list, and we're working through that. But Jake, I think all along, was the one that we wanted in this class. And I think this one that, from Coach Diaz's perspective, Coach Lashley, and us in the recruiting office, he's really a guy that we had on campus, loved everything about him. He's really the guy that we pushed for the entire time. So I don't want to say he was every egg was in that basket, but there was a lot in there. He was the guy that we really wanted. And that's I think the second part of your question was just evaluation. That's, for that position, is really going to be difficult this year, because you need to see a quarterback in person a lot of times. We get tons of film, and whether it's in the game film or camp and combine film, but you really want to see those guys in person. And that's going to make evaluating quarterbacks difficult in this class. So,
Thank you.
Andy, we got time for a couple more. We're going to go to Susan Miller-Degnan at the Miami Herald. Susan, go ahead.
Hey, Andy. When is it that you realize, after you sign a class, that this class was as great as advertised? I mean, do you have to wait a season, 2 years? Does it not even matter? I mean, obviously it matters to you, but how do you learn from that as far as recruiting goes?
Susan, I think for us, it's not about the rankings. We'll let everybody else debate that stuff. For us, it's making sure that we get guys that are the right fit for our systems, the right fit for our culture. And when you get those guys, I think, especially like with this class and then the last class that we signed, you kind of know early on that these are our kind of guys. So you get a sense of that. And when they come in, and whether some of these guys are going to be mid-years or guys that come in over the summer, and you start to see them interact with the players that are already here, see them perform in camp, workouts, you kind of get a little flash of guys. Like there's early on with these mid-years in the last class where they were in the weight room and mat drills and the little spring practice we had. You're like, okay, we're on to something here. So I think it's just being confident in our evaluations, knowing what we have and the type of guys we have, and we'll let the chips fall where they may. But as long as we do that on the front end, I think we're going to be good and happy to watch them perform. So.
And Andy, also, how different was it? I mean, you talked about doing things virtually. Did it help in any way in the end? And in what ways, has it been beneficial? And what did you learn to help you in the future?
You're referring to the virtual part, or just the fact that there was a dead period?
Well, yeah, I mean, it all goes hand in hand, that you couldn't really see the kids one-on-one, and you know what I mean, the way it is. What did you learn from that?
Obviously it hurts us a little bit in the evaluation parts. We have to find creative ways to do that. But I think the good part of it is it shows how much relationships are important in this process. And when you take all the factors out of, all the trips and the flashy buildings and all this other stuff, and we've got great stuff here, but when you take that out of the discussion and it's just, who are you as a person, as a coach? What kind of staff and situation am I going into as a recruit? How does that fit me and my personality? How does your system fit my personality? When you get down to the nuts and bolts of it, I think when you focus on those things and really can expand on that over time, I think that's what's important. I think it takes us back to the basics of what recruiting should be. That relationship aspect of it, and the real cultural fit and the system fit that guys really are looking at. And I think it brings back to perspective of how important it is to play where it's easy to be close to friends and family. I think that's been important to a lot of guys in this class. So
that's great. Thank you.
Andy, we got two quick ones for you. We're going to go back to David Lake at Inside the U. David, go ahead.
Yeah, Andy, you mentioned you're going to be looking maybe for corners to close out this cycle. Just want to ask you like a nerdy evaluation question about, what you're looking for in a corner, particularly the balance between size and length and speed. you know, do you have like a minimum size you're looking for and a, you know, baseline speed mark you're looking for at corners?
Yeah, we've got some guidelines that is kind of a range for height, for speed. Um, but we're really looking for guys that have that mentality. We say it all the time. It's kind of a token phrase, but the dog mentality, like a guy that's not afraid, a guy that has a short-term memory. Because that's a tough position to play in football with the way offenses are now. A guy that's just mentally tough, that's physical. A guy that obviously that can run and has some twitch to him. But really that personality type is a lot, so if the size is not exactly, what the quote unquote experts say it should be for a corner, we're looking at those intangibles of what kind of person they are, their mentality, those kind of things really play a lot into it. So we want to have a good balance in the room, but we're not going to turn down a guy that we think has all these other qualities and maybe is just shy of a height or just shy of a speed if we think they're a really good football player.
Last one for you, Andy, is David Wilson from the Miami Herald. David, go ahead.
Andy, I just want to follow up on Jake because he was obviously a guy that Coach Enos and some of the old offensive coaches liked, and they were the ones who kind of got him on campus. Obviously, you guys have a lot different offense now than last year. Just curious what Coach Lashley kind of liked about him, and what makes him a guy that two very different offensive coordinators, quarterback coaches value.
Sure. I think it's some of the things I talked about earlier. A lot of it's the intangibles to play that position and be QB1 for a place like Miami. You have to have a certain type of personality. You saw that this year in De'Eric, the way they carry themselves, the way, they need to be a leader, the way guys need to follow them. I think you see a lot of those qualities this year in De'Eric, and a lot of those qualities are in Jake too. I think you're going to see that. Not that the guys in the room now don't have it, but just the fact that he's the kind of guy that you want as a quarterback in your system. And the guy can play. I mean, you can see all the throws. He can make all the throws. He is athletic. He's not asked to do that a lot, but he is an athletic player who can make some things happen with his feet if he needs to. So I think he still fits really well. And, like I said, we're going to look for the best players that we can. And if we have to tweak a little bit, here or there, I think we'd be willing to do that. But so we just can't turn down a really good player like Jake. So.
Thank you.
Andy, thanks for spending a few minutes with us today, and good luck the remainder of the period.
You bet.